The first time the Zalaxian Confederacy met humans in person, they were not impressed. Humans were small compared to the average galactic species. They had no claws, no natural armor, and their teeth could barely tear through basic packaging. Their skin tore easily. They required constant water and regular food. They needed specific air mixtures and temperatures just to function. To the battle-hardened species of the galaxy, humans looked like prey. That was their first mistake. Frank Miller stood at the airlock of the Joint Training Facility on Mars, watching the alien delegation arrive. He kept his face neutral, but his eyes missed nothing. The Zalaxians were tall, blue-skinned humanoids with forearms and reflective eyes. Behind them came the Drex, reptilian warriors with natural armor plating and regenerative abilities. Last were the Viridians, insect-like beings who shared a hive mind across their individual bodies. "Welcome to Mars Outpost 7, said Admiral Reed, the human representative. "We look forward to these joint exercises to strengthen our new alliance." Gibby. Zalaxian Commander General Zorl nodded his large head. "We are curious to see human military capabilities. Your species is new to the galactic community." Frank heard the dismissal in the alien's tone. It didn't bother him. He had been a special operative for 15 years, and people underestimating him had kept him alive more than once. "Agent Miller will show your troops to their quarters," Admiral Reed said, gesturing toward Frank. Frank stepped forward and bowed slightly. "This way, please." For 3 days, the joint exercises went smoothly. The human troops surprised the aliens with their adaptability, but nothing alarming happened. On the 4th day, Frank noticed something odd. A group of Drex soldiers were talking quietly, looking at the schedule of visiting Earth officials. Frank had spent his free time learning alien body language, and he recognized the signs of hunters discussing prey. That evening, Frank followed the suspicious Drex group to a restricted communication center. He recorded their conversation through the air duct. "The plan is set," said the largest Drex, his scales shifting to a dark red color. "When the Earth officials arrive tomorrow, we take them during the power reset. The hovercraft will be waiting at the south entrance." "What about the human guards?" asked another Drex. The leader made a dismissive gesture. "Humans are soft. If they resist, kill them. Our employers want the officials alive, but no one cares about the guards." Frank silently moved away from the vent. He tried to call headquarters, but found all communications jammed. The Drex had planned well. Frank was alone, with 7 elite alien warriors planning to kidnap Earth officials in less than 8 hours. He needed weapons, but the armory required 2 officers to open. He needed backup, but communications were down. Frank took a deep breath and did what humans do best. He adapted. First, Frank went to the maintenance bay. He found cleaning solution, metal pipes, and electrical equipment. He worked quickly, creating simple but effective traps. Then he went to the kitchen and took knives, heavy pots, and cooking oil. In the medical bay, he took sedatives and bandages. None of these items required security clearance. 2 hours before the Earth officials were due to arrive, Frank was ready. He had mapped the entire station in his head and prepared a battlefield that would work to his advantage. The first Drex entered the south corridor at exactly 0600 hours. Frank watched from above, hidden in the air ducts. As the Drex passed under him, Frank dropped a pot of heated cooking oil mixed with sedatives. The Drex screamed as the mixture covered his scales, the sedative seeping into his skin through his breathing pores. Before the alien could call for help, Frank dropped down and struck precisely at the base of the Drex's skull, where the scales were thinnest. The Drex collapsed. 1 down, 6 to go. The next 2 Drex came looking for their missing companion. They found a dark corridor with flickering lights. Frank had rewired the electrical system to create strobe effects that disoriented the Drex's heat-sensing vision. When they stumbled, confused by the light patterns, Frank attacked from the shadows. He drove a kitchen knife into a gap in the first Drex's natural armor, then swung a metal pipe at the second one's knee joint. Both aliens fell, stunned by the speed and precision of the attack. "What's happening?" a voice called over the Drex. "Communicators." "Team 1, report." Frank picked up the communicator from the fallen Drex. "Need backup at South Corridor," he said, mimicking the Drex's raspy voice. The human is tricky. The trap was set. 2 more Drex rushed to the South Corridor, weapons ready. They never saw the tripwire made from electrical cables. When they fell, Frank emerged from his hiding spot and struck decisive blows before they could recover. 5 down, 2 to go. The Drex leader realized something was wrong. "Spread out," he told his remaining soldier. "The human is using the environment against us. Remember, their only advantage is their brain. They are physically weak." Frank smiled in the darkness. Yes, humans weren't the strongest or fastest species, but they were the best at turning disadvantages into advantages. The 6th Drex entered the kitchen area carefully, his weapon scanning each corner. He didn't look up at the ceiling panels, where Frank waited. When the Drex passed underneath, Frank dropped down onto his shoulders. The alien was stronger, but Frank had positioned himself perfectly, using the Drex's own weight and momentum against him. They crashed to the floor, and Frank quickly applied pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of the Drex's skull, a weakness he had learned about during the joint training sessions. Only the leader remained. Frank could hear him moving toward the communication center, probably to call for backup. Frank took a different route, arriving first. He disabled the communication equipment, then waited in the shadows. The Drex leader entered cautiously, his 4 eyes sweeping the room. "I know you're here, human," he said. "You've surprised me. Your kind looks so harmless." Frank remained silent, studying the Drex's movements. The leader had heavier armor than the others and carried an energy weapon that could vaporize a human instantly. "Your silence won't save you," the Drex continued. "I've hunted prey across 17 star systems. Nothing escapes me." Frank picked up a small metal object from his pocket, an emergency flashlight from the medical bay. When the Drex turned away, Frank tossed it across the room. The Drex spun, firing his weapon at the noise. In that moment of distraction, Frank sprinted forward and slid beneath the Drex's legs. As he passed under the alien, Frank thrust upward with a metal spike he had fashioned from a maintenance tool, striking the one spot where all Drex were vulnerable, the nerve cluster connecting their tails to their spines. The Drex leader collapsed, paralyzed but conscious. Frank stood over him, breathing heavily. "How?" the Drex gasped. "You're just one human." Frank checked his watch. The security systems would reset in 3 minutes, and communications would be restored. "That's the thing. You aliens don't understand," Frank said quietly. "Humans never evolved to be the strongest or fastest. We evolved to adapt, to solve problems. When we can't overpower something, we outthink it." When Earth security forces finally arrived, they found Frank sitting calmly in the control room. 7 elite Drex warriors incapacitated and bound with makeshift restraints. The incident was quickly classified, but stories spread. The Galactic Security Council demanded an explanation. Earth officials simply stated that Agent Miller had acted in accordance with standard human defensive protocols. No one mentioned that these standard protocols were Frank making things up as he went along, using his environment and knowledge to overcome impossible odds. No one mentioned that every human operative was trained to do exactly this. Within a month, mercenary guilds across 3 sectors had quietly raised their prices for contracts involving humans. Some guilds refused such contracts entirely, and thus began the galaxy's education on why hunting human operatives was a very, very bad idea. 5 years passed since Agent Frank Miller's legendary encounter with the Drex warriors. The story had spread across the galaxy, but many alien mercenaries dismissed it as luck or exaggeration. Humans couldn't possibly be that dangerous, they reasoned. The Krell Syndicate, the most feared criminal organization in 3-star systems, was about to learn this lesson the hard way. Samantha Wright sat alone in the dim light of an abandoned mining facility on Europa, Jupiter's icy moon. The facility had been shut down years ago when the methane reserves ran low. Now it served as the perfect hiding spot. Samantha was an intelligence officer who had uncovered the Krell Syndicate's weapons smuggling operation in the Proxima Centauri system. For this, they wanted her dead. Samantha checked her equipment one last time. Standard issue sidearm with only 12 rounds remaining. Combat knife. Emergency medical kit. Portable air scrubber. And her wits. She knew they were coming for her. The Krell never left loose ends. Outside the facility, a sleek black ship landed silently on Europa's icy surface. The ship's hull was covered in stealth coating that absorbed radar signals. The side door opened, and 9 figures stepped out. 8 were various alien species, all heavily armed and wearing advanced armor. The 9th was their leader, Grozek, stood 7 feet tall with gray-scaled skin and 4 yellow eyes that could see in complete darkness. He was the Syndicate's top hunter with over 200 successful eliminations. Not once had he failed a contract. Today would not be his first failure, he thought. The human female is inside, Grozek told his team. Remember, humans are physically weak but can be tricky. Stay alert. His team nodded. They were the best hunters money could buy, from species across the galaxy. They had studied the Frank Miller incident and were determined not to make the same mistakes. Spread out and find her, Grozek ordered. Teams of 2. Comms stay open at all times. The hunters entered the facility through different access points. The mining complex was huge, with dozens of tunnels spreading out like a spider web. Old machinery and equipment lay abandoned throughout the facility. Perfect hiding spots for their prey, but also perfect ambush points. The first team moved down a dark corridor, their weapons ready. They passed an old processing machine, not noticing the thin wire stretched across the floor. When they tripped it, the machine activated suddenly, its rusty gears grinding to life. The noise wasn't the trap. It was the distraction. While they looked at the machine, Samantha dropped from a ceiling vent behind them. 2 quick strikes to pressure points she had studied in alien physiology, and both hunters collapsed. Team 1 report. Grozek's voice crackled over the comm. Nothing but static answered. The second team was more careful. They checked every corner, every shadow, but they didn't check the floor. Years of ice buildup had made the floors slippery in some areas. Samantha had found these spots during her 3 days hiding in the facility. She watched from behind a frozen pipe as the hunters stepped onto a section of thin ice covering a deep maintenance shaft. Their weight did the rest. Across the facility, similar scenes played out. One team found a room filled with broken machinery that showed signs of recent movement. They entered carefully, weapons first. But Samantha wasn't hiding. There. She had set up the room as a decoy while she circled behind them. She used the facility's old intercom system to play recorded sounds of movement from one section while she struck from another. 4 hours into the hunt, Grozek realized something was wrong. 6 of his hunters were missing. No blood, no signs of a firefight. Just gone. She's hunting us, he realized with shock. Grozek and his last hunter regrouped near the main control room. They stood back to back, watching all approaches. How is she doing this? The hunter asked nervously. She's just one human. Stay focused, Grozek growled. She has no weapons that can penetrate our armor. She's just delaying the inevitable. As if on cue, the lights in the facility suddenly came on, blinding them momentarily. Their visors automatically adjusted, but in that split second of distraction, something small and round rolled toward them. Grenade, the hunter yelled, but it wasn't an explosive. It was an old pressure gauge that had popped off its housing. Another distraction. The real danger came from above. Samantha had cut through a coolant pipe in the ceiling. Supercooled liquid methane poured down on the hunters. Their armor, designed to withstand heat and energy weapons, offered little protection against the extreme cold. The liquid froze on contact, sealing joints and clogging weapon ports. The last hunter panicked and fired his weapon. The frozen firing mechanism malfunctioned, causing a feedback loop in the energy cell. The resulting explosion was small, but enough to knock him unconscious. Now only Grozek remained. His more advanced armor had protected him from the worst of the coolant, but his left side was partially frozen. He backed into the control room, scanning for threats. "Impressive, human," he called out. But this game ends now. Samantha's voice echoed through the room's speakers. This isn't a game. You made it personal when you targeted my team in Proxima Centauri. Business is business, Grozek replied, slowly turning in a circle. Nothing personal about it. Then consider this a business lesson, Samantha said. Grozek noticed movement in his peripheral vision and fired quickly. His shot hit nothing but a jacket Samantha had hung on a moving fan blade. The distraction cost him. Samantha had positioned herself behind an old console. She fired her last 3 rounds not at Grozek, but at the control panel on the wall behind him. The panel sparked and exploded, sending the facility into emergency lockdown mode. Heavy metal doors began closing throughout the complex. The main reactor, dormant for years, began an emergency cooling sequence. Liquid methane pumped through the facility's pipes at high pressure. What have you done? Grozek demanded. Samantha stepped into view, staying out of his weapons range. I've spent 3 days learning every inch of this facility, every system, every weakness. You spent 4 hours walking into my traps. Grozek aimed his weapon. I can still complete my contract. Look at your ship's sensors, Samantha suggested. Grozek checked his wrist display. His eyes widened. The facility's reactor was building toward critical failure. Not an explosion. A massive pressure wave that would flatten everything within a mile radius. We'll both die, he said. Samantha smiled and held up a small device. Facility manager's emergency transport beacon. 1-person capacity. It'll activate in exactly 30 seconds. Grozek lunged forward, but his partially frozen armor slowed him. Samantha easily sidestepped him. The Syndicate will send others, Grozek warned. Tell them what happened here, Samantha replied calmly. Tell them what one human did to your elite hunting team. Tell them that next time I won't be so merciful. The transport beacon activated, surrounding Samantha in a blue light. Just before she disappeared, she tossed a small data chip to Grozek. That's the evidence I gathered on your weapons operation. A copy is already with Earth intelligence. Consider our business concluded. After Samantha vanished, Grozek barely managed to reach his ship before the facility collapsed. As he escaped Europa's orbit, he sent one final message to the Syndicate. They don't think like us. They don't fight like us. Abort all contracts on humans. I repeat, abort. Static cut off the rest of his message. The bounty on Samantha Wright was quietly withdrawn the next day. Soon after, the Krell Syndicate added a new rule to their operational guidelines. No contracts on human intelligence personnel would be accepted regardless of the payment offered. After the incidents with Frank Miller and Samantha Wright, stories about human operatives spread across the galaxy. Many alien species dismissed these tales as exaggerations. The Viridian Network, a collective of insect-like beings sharing a hive mind, was particularly skeptical. They believed their superior technology and collective intelligence would easily overcome any human resistance. This confidence led them to target Agent Paul Jackson after he compromised one of their bio-research facilities. The human had discovered their illegal experiments on sentient species and had stolen valuable data. The Viridians could not allow this breach to go unpunished. They needed to eliminate Jackson and recover the stolen data to protect their reputation. Paul Jackson knew they were coming for him. He had chosen the remote exoplanet HC-2219 as his battleground. The planet was covered in dense jungles and rugged mountain ranges. The atmosphere was breathable for humans but slightly uncomfortable for most other species. Perfect for what he had planned. The Viridians sent their elite extraction team, 12 of their best hunters connected through a shared consciousness. They landed their stealth ship in a small clearing and immediately began tracking Jackson using advanced sensors that could detect human body heat, breath chemicals, and even the electrical signals from human nervous systems. Target is moving north, reported the lead hunter, a large purple-skinned insectoid with compound eyes. Sensors show he is alone and lightly armed. The Viridian team moved with perfect coordination, as if they were a single organism with 12 bodies. They communicated without speaking, sharing information instantly through their hive connection. What they didn't realize was that Jackson was watching them from a nearby ridge. He had set up false heat signatures and breath chemical emitters to lead them exactly where he wanted. The human hadn't survived 15 years as a field operative by being predictable. On the first day, the Viridians followed Jackson's trail into a narrow canyon. They moved cautiously, aware of potential ambush points. But Jackson wasn't hiding in the canyon. He had circled behind them and was now following his pursuers. When the Viridians reached the end of the canyon and found nothing but a small campsite with a still warm fire, they were confused. The human must be using technological countermeasures, the lead hunter decided. Spread out and search the area. He cannot have gone far. As the Viridians searched, Jackson quietly eliminated their food supplies left at their base camp. He didn't need to kill them, just outlast them. By the third day, the Viridians were growing frustrated. Their perfect coordination was becoming a weakness. Because they all thought alike, they all fell for the same tricks. Jackson led them through swamps that drained their energy, over rough terrain that damaged their exoskeletons, and into dense brush that clogged their breathing filters. On the fifth day, one of the Viridian hunters failed to report in. The others found him unconscious, not dead. Jackson had used a plant toxin that affected the Viridian nervous system. It wasn't lethal, but it temporarily disconnected the hunter from the hive mind. He is learning our weaknesses, the lead hunter realized, with alarm. How is this possible? We have only been on this planet for 5 days. What the Viridians didn't know was that Jackson had spent 3 weeks on HC 2219 before they arrived, studying every plant, animal, and terrain feature. He had tested local plants on samples of Viridian tissue he'd collected from their research facility. He had mapped every cave, every stream, every potential advantage the planet offered. By the end of the first week, 3 more Viridian hunters had been incapacitated. Not killed, just removed from the hunt. This confused the Viridians even more. In their culture, enemies were eliminated, not disabled. The human is toying with us, the lead hunter told the remaining team members. We must adapt our approach. They decided to stop chasing and set a trap instead. They found a freshwater spring, one of the few on this part of the planet, and waited. Every living thing needs water, they reasoned. Even humans. 3 days passed. The Viridians remained in position, their patience infinite thanks to their hive-mind connection. But Jackson didn't appear. Instead, the remaining Viridians began to feel strangely tired. Their normally perfect coordination became sluggish. Something is wrong, the lead hunter realized too late. Jackson had contaminated their water supply with a mild sedative, not enough to knock them out completely, but enough to slow their reactions. By the beginning of the third week, only 2 Viridian hunters remained active, the lead hunter and his second-in-command. They had lost contact with their ship. Their supplies were gone. Their advanced tracking equipment had been damaged or led them on wild chases that ended nowhere. This is impossible, the second-in-command said, his mandibles clicking in agitation. He is one human against the network. How can he evade us for so long? The lead hunter had no answer. In their shared consciousness, the Viridians had always considered humans physically inferior. They had 4 limbs instead of 6, no natural armor, poor night vision, and modest strength. But what they hadn't considered was human endurance. While the Viridians needed regular rest cycles to maintain their hive connection, Jackson had trained himself to function on minimal sleep. 2 hours a night was all he needed. The rest of the time he was planning, setting traps, and studying his enemies. On the 21st day, the remaining Viridian hunters finally cornered Jackson at the edge of a massive canyon. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, expecting tricks. Instead, they found the human sitting calmly on a rock drinking water from a canteen. Took you long enough, Jackson said with a smile. You have nowhere to run, the lead hunter said, moving closer. Surrender the stolen data, and your death will be quick. Jackson took another sip of water. You know what's interesting about humans? We evolved as persistence hunters. Our ancestors would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not the strongest or fastest species, but we can keep going long after others have given up. The Viridians moved to surround him, still not understanding. I haven't been running from you, Jackson continued. I've been leading you. For 3 weeks, I've studied how you move, how you think, what makes you vulnerable. And I've been placing small seismic charges throughout these mountains. The lead hunter's compound eyes widened. You're bluffing. Jackson held up a small detonator. Am I? Before the Viridians could react, Jackson pressed the button. The ground beneath them trembled. Then with a deafening roar, the canyon wall collapsed. Tons of rock crashed down, creating a natural barrier between Jackson and the Viridian hunters. Through a small gap in the rubble, the lead hunter saw Jackson using climbing equipment to descend the opposite side of the canyon, a route he had clearly prepared days in advance. We will hunt you across the galaxy for this, the lead hunter called out. Jackson paused in his descent. No, you won't. The data I stole has already been transmitted to Earth, and I've just proven that hunting humans is bad for business. The Viridian network spent 3 more days extracting their hunters from the planet. When they finally returned to their central hive, they formally requested that Earth's military establish exclusion zones for their operatives. The message was becoming clear across the galaxy. Tangling with human operatives was a losing proposition, regardless of technological or physical advantages. After multiple failed attempts to neutralize human operatives, the Zyalaxian Confederacy grew concerned. Their military leaders had watched Frank Miller defeat elite Drex warriors with nothing but improvised weapons. They had studied reports of Samantha Wright outmaneuvering the Krell Syndicate's top hunter. They had analyzed how Paul Jackson had systematically broken down a Viridian extraction team through endurance and planning. The Zyalaxians were a logical species who prided themselves on understanding their opponents. They needed to know what made humans so dangerous despite their physical limitations. To solve this mystery, they assigned their leading xenopsychologist, Dr. Zalmor, to observe humans in combat situations. Dr. Zalmor was given the perfect opportunity when Agent Lisa Carter was assigned to security detail for a diplomatic mission on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The doctor posed as a cultural attaché, his forearms and blue skin hidden beneath formal diplomatic robes. His real mission was to study Carter without her knowledge. Lisa Carter was a veteran operative with 12 years of field experience. She stood 5'6" with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun. Nothing about her physical appearance suggested she was especially dangerous. She carried a standard sidearm, but otherwise looked like any other human security officer. Dr. Zalmor observed Carter for 3 days during routine security operations. He noted how she constantly scanned rooms, memorized faces, and checked escape routes. Even during quiet moments, her mind seemed to be working, calculating, preparing. Humans never truly relax, Dr. Zalmor wrote in his notes. They are always alert, always processing information. It's as if they expect danger at all times. On the 4th day of the diplomatic conference, separatist forces attacked the compound. A group of 20 heavily armed militants from various species stormed the main building, cutting off communications and trapping the diplomats inside. Dr. Zalmor found himself huddled with other officials in the main conference room when Carter entered. She looked calm, her weapon drawn but held low. Everyone stay down, she instructed. I'm going to clear a path to the emergency shuttles. One of the diplomats, a nervous Drex ambassador, stood up. There are at least 20 attackers out there. You can't possibly... I've counted 17 so far, Carter corrected him. And yes, I can. But I need you all to follow my instructions. Exactly. Dr. Zalmor watched with fascination as Carter quickly organized the diplomats. She gave each person simple, clear tasks. Some would carry important documents. Others would help the elderly or injured. She assigned 2 physically strong diplomats to assist if barricades needed moving. Then, most interestingly to Dr. Zalmor, she spent 30 seconds studying the room's architectural plans mounted on the wall. She memorized the entire layout of the diplomatic compound, including ventilation shafts, maintenance corridors, and emergency exits. Now I need everyone to be absolutely silent, Carter said. When I give the signal, move quickly and stay together. What happened next amazed Dr. Zalmor. Carter didn't simply engage the attackers with brute force as most security personnel would. Instead, she employed a series of psychological tactics that confused and disoriented the Separatists. First, she used the building's intercom system to broadcast false security alerts to different areas, drawing attackers away from their position. Then she manipulated the environmental controls, creating zones of darkness in some corridors while flooding others with blinding light. When she did engage attackers directly, her approach was even more surprising. She didn't fight each species the same way. When facing a Drex militant, she maneuvered him into a small enclosed space, exploiting their natural fear of confinement. Against a Viridian attacker, she isolated him from his companions, triggering their instinctive dread of being cut off from the hive mind. Most remarkable to Dr. Zalmor was how she handled a Zaelaxian attacker. The Zaelaxians prided themselves on logical, symmetrical thinking. Carter created deliberately chaotic asymmetrical situations that the Zaelaxian couldn't process effectively. She would move in unpredictable patterns, attack from unexpected angles, and use irrational tactics that defied logical prediction. Within 40 minutes, Carter had neutralized 11 attackers and cleared a path to the emergency shuttles. Not one diplomat was injured. As they boarded the shuttles, Dr. Zalmor lingered behind, watching Carter set up final defensive positions to cover their escape. "You should get on the shuttle, Doctor," Carter said without looking at him. Dr. Zalmor was startled. "How did you know I'm a doctor? My credentials list me as a cultural attaché." Carter glanced at him, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. "Your hands. You hold them like someone used to precise work. You observe more than you speak. And you've been studying me since we arrived." "You knew?" Dr. Zalmor asked, astonished. "I make it my business to know who's watching me," Carter replied simply. After the diplomats were safely evacuated, Dr. Zalmor requested a formal interview with Carter, revealing his true purpose. To his surprise, she agreed. "How did you know the specific weaknesses of each species?" he asked. "The Drex fear of enclosed spaces, the Viridian discomfort with isolation, the Zaelaxian aversion to asymmetry." Carter looked at him thoughtfully. "I watched how they moved, how they reacted. Everyone tells you who they are if you pay attention. But that level of observation, to understand psychological weaknesses so quickly..." Carter shrugged. "Humans evolved as social creatures who had to read tiny cues to survive. Is that person a threat? Are they lying? What are they planning? Our ancestors who couldn't read others accurately didn't survive long enough to have children." Dr. Zalmor made careful notes. "And the way you fight differently against each species?" "Adaptation," Carter explained. "Humans can't rely on being the strongest or fastest, so we learn to adapt our approach based on who we're facing. We find weaknesses. We exploit patterns. We change tactics when something isn't working." The Zaelaxian scientist was silent for a moment, processing this information. "It's more than physical adaptation, though. You seem to understand how other species think." Carter nodded. "Humans call it empathy. We can put ourselves in someone else's position, imagine what they're feeling or thinking. It helps us connect with allies and predict what enemies will do." After hours of interviews, Dr. Zalmor returned to the Confederacy with his findings. His classified report sent shockwaves through Zaelaxian military command. "Human operatives appear uniquely capable of weaponizing empathy," the report concluded. "They understand how we think while remaining fundamentally unpredictable themselves. This combination makes them extremely dangerous opponents regardless of their physical limitations." The report recommended extreme caution when dealing with human operatives. It suggested that numerical superiority and technological advantages were often negated by the human ability to identify and exploit psychological weaknesses. Within months, the Zaelaxian Confederacy had revised their military protocols. Special training programs were developed to help soldiers guard against psychological manipulation. Bounties on human operatives were quietly dropped. The message was spreading across the galaxy. Humans weren't just physically dangerous, they could get inside your mind. By the year 2180, stories about human operatives had spread across the known galaxy. Frank Miller's improvised warfare against the Drex, Samantha Wright's clever traps for the Krell hunters, Paul Jackson's endurance against the Viridians, and Lisa Carter's psychological tactics against various species had become legendary tales told in mercenary guilds. The effect was clear. The price for contracts targeting humans had tripled, with an additional hazard multiplier for military or intelligence personnel. Most reputable guilds simply refused such contracts outright, but not everyone had gotten the message. A coalition of mercenary groups still believed they could succeed where others had failed. Their target: Agent Daniel Ross, stationed at Earth's embassy on the neutral trading hub Nexus Prime. Nexus Prime was a massive space station where dozens of species conducted trade, diplomacy, and occasionally espionage. The Earth embassy was small but strategically important, housing a secure data center with valuable intelligence. Daniel Ross didn't look impressive. He stood 5'10" with short brown hair and a lean build. He had been with Earth intelligence for 14 years, mostly analyzing data rather than conducting field operations. This made him seem like an easy target to mercenaries who didn't understand the human training program. The coalition spent weeks planning their raid. They studied the embassy's security systems, bribed maintenance workers for building schematics, and timed guard rotations. They assembled 23 of the galaxy's most dangerous mercenaries, including the infamous Kragar the Unyielding, a cyborg warrior who had survived over 300 contracts across 17 systems. What they didn't realize was that Ross had been watching them prepare. Every bribe they paid, every schematic they acquired, every meeting they held, Ross knew about it all. He had allowed their plan to proceed, making subtle adjustments to the embassy's systems that wouldn't be noticed until it was too late. On the day of the raid, Ross was the only security personnel on duty. The mercenary coalition had arranged a false emergency that drew the other guards away. Ross sat at his desk, calmly sipping coffee as the embassy's AI alerted him to multiple security breaches. "Sir, we have intruders at access points 7, 12, and 15, the AI reported. "Security protocols suggest immediate evacuation." Ross took another sip of his coffee. "No need for evacuation, Ada. Initiate protocol, Scarecrow." "Protocol." "Scarecrow activated," the AI confirmed. "Would you like me to alert Earth Command?" "Not yet," Ross replied, standing up. "Let's give our guests a proper welcome first." Throughout the embassy, subtle changes began to occur. Air pressure fluctuated in certain corridors, throwing off the balance of species adapted to specific gravity conditions. Temperature controls shifted, making some areas uncomfortably cold for reptilian species and others too warm for those with heavy fur or exoskeletons. The first group of mercenaries entered through a service tunnel. They moved with professional precision, weapons ready. The leader, a four-armed Zayalaxian, signaled for them to check their environmental suits as the temperature dropped suddenly. "Remember, he's just one human," the Zayalaxian whispered. "Stay focused." As they rounded a corner, emergency lights began flashing in an irregular pattern, not the standard alarm sequence, but a disorienting strobe that affected the visual processing centers of most non-human species. The mercenaries slowed, trying to adjust their vision. That's when Ross struck. He didn't engage them directly. Instead, he used the embassy's automated defense systems in ways they weren't designed for. Cleaning, drones sprayed lubricant on the floor, maintenance bots dropped ceiling panels, fire suppression systems activated selectively, filling some corridors with foam while leaving others clear. The mercenaries found themselves separated, disoriented, and increasingly frustrated. Their carefully coordinated attack had devolved into confusion within minutes. In the central security hub, Ross watched their progress on monitors. He didn't look worried or even particularly focused. He looked like someone solving an interesting puzzle. "Ida, switch to Phase 2, he instructed the AI. The embassy's communication system came to life, broadcasting different messages to different sections of the building. Some mercenaries heard security alerts directing them to evacuate. Others heard messages that seemed to come from their teammates giving contradictory instructions. The hive-minded Viridians in the group received cognitive interference patterns that disrupted their collective thinking. One by one, the mercenaries began to make mistakes. They fired at shadows. They accused each other of sabotage. Some simply gave up, dropping their weapons and sitting down, overwhelmed by the sensory manipulation. Ross finally left the security hub when only 5 mercenaries remained, including Kragar the Unyielding. The cyborg warrior had adapted to many of Ross's tricks, his mechanical enhancements filtering out the sensory distortions. As Ross approached the corridor where Kragar waited, he picked up a standard-issue stun baton, his first and only weapon. "Hey, know you're there, human?" Kragar called out, his voice partly mechanical. "Your tricks won't work on me. I've survived 300 contracts. I've killed beings from 40 different species." Ross stepped into view, looking remarkably casual. "Impressive resume. But you've never faced a human operative before, have you?" Kragar laughed, the sound distorted by his vocal processors. "I've studied your kind. You're clever, but ultimately fragile." "Did your studies include examining your own exoskeleton for design flaws?" Ross asked conversationally. The question caught Kragar off guard. "What?" "Your cybernetic spine. The connection to your lower vertebrae has a microscopic stress fracture. Every time you move suddenly it gets worse." Kragar instinctively straightened, his sensors running internal diagnostics. How could you possibly know? That moment of distraction was all Ross needed. He moved with surprising speed, closing the distance between them and striking precisely at the weak point he had identified, a spot where Kragar's natural armor connected to his cybernetic enhancements. The stun baton delivered its charge directly to the mercenary's nervous system. Kragar collapsed, his systems temporarily overloaded. The fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. When the embassy's security team finally returned, they found 19 mercenaries who had surrendered rather than continue facing Ross's psychological warfare. 4 were unconscious but unharmed. Ross himself was in the cafeteria preparing another cup of coffee. The data center remained secure with no signs of breach. "How did you do it?" the security chief asked, looking at the surveillance footage. In disbelief, Ross shrugged. "I just paid attention. Everyone has weaknesses, physical, psychological, tactical. You just need to observe carefully enough to find them." News of the failed raid spread quickly through mercenary networks. Within a month, the Galactic Security Council noted a 97% decrease in operations targeting human facilities or personnel. When questioned about human defensive capabilities at a council meeting, Earth's ambassador simply smiled and said, "We prefer not to discuss our methods, but we're always open to peaceful cooperation." The mercenary guild masters gathered for an emergency summit on the neutral planet Corvus III. After 3 days of heated debate, they established a new universal protocol that was added to all guild charters. Classification H contracts, R2, be declined without exception. Operatives disregarding this directive do so at their own risk and forfeit all guild protections. To this day, human operatives move freely through even the most lawless sectors of known space. Their reputation serves as better protection than any weapon or shield technology could provide. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Hunting humans was simply bad for business, and worse for one's health.